Greetings to all of you, my dear sisters and brothers, and my dear friends. A warm welcome to all of you from your Pastor Yeti. Well, it's been a while since we met with each other on this broadcasting on Saturday, when a woman meets Jesus, finding the love every woman longs for. So, we together are back on track. Welcome all of you, and especially to all women. Today we're going to talk about the labeled woman. And there was a woman who for 18 years had an infirmity. She was bent completely forward and utterly unable to straighten herself up or to look forward. Luke 13, verse 11. If you have found yourself feeling trapped by a name that not only defines but diminishes you, then come meet a lady who was so boxed in by a false identity that we don't even know the name her parents gave her when she was born. We don't know where she lived or whether she got married and had children. We know only one thing about her. She had a disability. Luke 13 verse 11 tells us she had a crooked, bent back. I doubt she had ever been told she was beautiful. She was never asked to enter the Miss Jerusalem pageant. Never complimented for the bright color of her eyes or the cute mole on her face. No, hers was quite a different life. She was a woman forced to stare at the ground because she could not stand erect. Life looking down. Just imagine what you would do meeting a woman for the first time who was stooped over like a reed in the wind. She could not stand straight. She appeared quite the opposite of what you and I were told to do when we were kids. Ever hear the words, "Stand up straight"? I did. But the bent-backed woman could not comply with the request to stand up straight. Hers was not to lean, graceful figure of a model because she was trapped in a contoured, malformed body. She walked around town looking down, her eyes seeing nothing but dirt when the sun shone and mud when the rain fell. After 18 long, miserable years, she began to think she was no better than the ground she was forced to observe. She couldn't even look into the faces of the townsfolk who mocked her. Here comes old Bandback, the crooked old stick. 18 years of derision, 18 years of ridicule, 18 years of having your identity stripped away, piece by piece. Luke says she was bound by a spirit of infirmity. Some biblical versions called her plague a demon. What a way to live. On second thought, how could anyone live like this? And while you and I will never know exactly what fiendish burden bedeviled this woman, I find it beneficial to widen our vision as to what it can mean to be devil-possessed. There are many spirits that can cause you to walk around in a bent-over state. They might be your color, your gender, your age, your material state, your family, or they could be abuse, injustice, resentment, oppression, despair, loneliness, your economic state, or even a physical challenge. It makes no difference what has hurt you in the past. It makes no difference how old you were when the trauma affected your life. And it makes no difference what your wealth, position, or status is. For the evil one comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and each one of us is a candidate for being bent and bowed. We know this lady was bowed down, weighed by some burden that would not even allow her to lift herself up. She could not change her situation. She could not fix herself. She needed help, and maybe that is what compelled her to go to the temple, even if she went alone. Even if people stared, even if they called her names. Perhaps she thought the pain in her aching heart would go away inside the walls of a sacred place. Maybe. She went to the temple in an attempt to find someone who would accept her, just as she was. And just maybe she heard Jesus would be there. And that was enough to get her to fight off the embarrassment and fear and go out in public. Even though we do not know exactly what drew her into the temple, we do know what kept her there. It was Jesus, the man who loves us from the inside out. In this particular day, there was a new face in town, a face the lady could not see. This was someone she didn't know, but someone who knew her, someone who had a vision that saw past her deformity, a man who could get past what he saw on the outside to see what was buried on the inside. What do you think drew Jesus to this woman? What factor in her experience touched off an explosion of compassion in his heart? To fully comprehend the empathy, yes, that is the word, Jesus had for this woman, you and I have only to look at the meaning of the word. The Webster Dictionary defines empathy as the ability to understand another's feelings, to be able to identify with and share another's feeling, or the situation they are in, or the attitudes people possesses toward them. I am certain that in the temple that day, there were individuals who were sympathetic to the trouble this woman faced. They were able to have sorrow feelings toward this woman and her predicament, but only Jesus. The view stopped at the outside. Poor, pitiful soul. Not Jesus. He had walked in her shoes. He knew her pain, for he had lived it every day since he was born. How? Reflect for a moment on what this woman's disability had done to her. It had caused her name to be distorted. It had left her identified as nothing more than a disfigured specimen of human flesh. And if anyone understood how names and labels can destroy who we really are, Jesus did. When he was born, the first thing people started to question were the circumstances surrounding his birth and his occupation. Mark 6:3 lifts the curtain on a drama that unfolded in Nazareth one weekend when Jesus stood up to speak. The conversation may have sounded something like this. Hold on. Who is this guy? It's Mary's son. He's just a common laborer. Nothing but a carpenter. And now he's preaching to us? And if you think saying Jesus was Mary's son was a compliment, you are mistaken. This phrase, Jesus, son of Mary, in old desert culture meant born to a woman out of wedlock, without a father's name attached to your lineage. People concluded you were an illegitimate child. And then Matthew tells us that Jesus had a party boy reputation. He states that townsfolk called Jesus a wine bibber or bibber, someone who might label a lush. He was called a glutton and an associate of scoundrels like tax collectors and prostitutes. Sounds like the real cream of the crop. And if a man is known by the company he keeps, Jesus must be one of the dregs of society, the scum of the earth. Talk about labels. Name-calling, an identity defined by exterior circumstances or behavior. Oh yes, Jesus had empathy. He understood exactly what this woman was going through, for he had been through there too. All at once the quiet of the temple service was broken by a voice that called out, "Come here. I want to meet you. You don't know me, but I know you." The woman didn't believe Jesus was talking to her. She couldn't see his mouth form the words that were beckoning her to his side. She felt a tap on her bent-over back. "Hey you, the man is talking to you." She shrank back in fear. She didn't want to be on display, not in front of everybody, not with her crooked back. If only she could crawl in a hole and disappear. But now everyone was staring at her. She couldn't see their eyes, but she could feel them watching and looking. A hush came over the crowd, and the woman moved toward Jesus. Once at his side, all she could see were a pair of sandal feet, for hers was a world of looking down. What she didn't know was that she was standing next to a man whose world was one of lifting up. "Woman, stand up straight." I love the way the Amplified Bible tells the story in Luke 13, the verses 12 to 13. "And when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, 'Woman, you are released from your infirmity.' Then he laid his hands on her, and instantly she was made straight, and she recognized and thanked and praised God." The Greek translation of the word released has to do with chains and irons and manacles, a prisoner's garb. So, if I am released, I am set free, given my liberty. What a wonderful thought. The ball and chain that had weighted this woman down were lifted up. Her crooked spine flexed straight to attention, and for the first time in 18 years, she was unencumbered by the physical malady that defined her. She was loosed from the prison that had bound her body and tortured her soul. Unrestricted for the first time in years, she was a free woman. Standing straight and tall, she could look at the stranger eye to eye. She could focus on the face of man who saw past her outside and took time to see what was on the inside. And the Bible says, she recognized him. She knew who he was. No doubt in her mind. When you meet your liberator, you don't have to be told who he is. She understood completely. Jesus looked into those eyes so long cast down and spoke one word, "Woman." He called her a name, not a label, not a slur, with a name that showed respect, a name with dignity, a name she had not heard in a long time, a name that gave her back her identity. At this point in the story, I imagine there was some hugging going on, as well as jumping up and down and running about. A girl can get very excited when she knows she's been set free. A girl can dance for joy when she finally knows exactly who she is. Our need and his response. Has some label obliterated your identity? Or you called a name that paints a false picture of who you really are? Do you long to lose the baggage of a name that is weighing you down, shackling your heart and binding your body? Thankfully, you and I have been left with the example of a lady who for 18 years lived in a faceless world, a world where a true self disappeared and a phantom self emerged, a self based on the visual image of her twisted body. All it took for her to get her identity back was to meet the man who sees us from the inside out. He helped her realize that underneath the distorted outside was a well-defined inside outlined by a pattern of what could be, not what was. Others might have had contempt for the woman because of what they saw. Jesus has respect for her because of what he knew. Names, labels, and slurs had not destroyed her true identity. Jesus knew that inside this woman was a heart where love could grow, where fulfillment could blossom, and where a true identity would flourish into a garden that portrayed the reality of what was there all alone. All she needed to do was accept the freedom Jesus offered. As Luke wrote so beautifully, the words of Jesus, God's Spirit is on me to set the burden and battered free. And on this day, in a temple, the battered was set free. Unlike others who see only what is skin deep, Jesus sees us heart deep. His view of you and me doesn't stop with the other layer, but penetrates our inner souls. His perception of me respects the person he made me to be. He who created you has called you by your name because you are his. Isn't it comforting to you there is someone who knows you from the inside out and still loves you? Someone who can get past the name-calling crowd, who doesn't label us by our past faults or current problems. He never slaps a brand on us based on our outward appearance. His name for us reflects who he made us to be. Jesus, as he called out to the woman in the temple, he is calling out to you. Keep listening. You won't have any trouble recognizing his voice. For he will be the man who calls you by name. And it will be a name of respect, a name with dignity, the name he gave you. See what an incredible quality of love the Father has given us, that we should be named and called the children of God. Beloved, we are even here and now God's children. It seems that more than ever, the compulsion today is to identify, to reduce someone to what is on the label. To identify is to control, to limit. To love is the call by name. So my beautiful women, let this be a healing, a touching by our Lord Jesus Christ in your life. May He bless you and cover you with His compassion and healing. Blessings to all of you, my dear ones. We meet each other on the next Saturday. Blessings in your weekend to all of you. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye.